The town of Crescent Falls wasn't where I imagined I'd end up, but that was before everything went to hell. I used to be a detective in the city, solving crimes that made headlines. Now, I'm just a guy who installs security systems for people who don't trust the world any more than I do. It's a simple life, and it works. Most days, I avoid thinking about what I lost. But there are nights when the old restlessness creeps in, when I miss the thrill of putting together a puzzle no one else could see. Those are the nights I try to stay busy, but sometimes it's not enough. That's why I was glad when Emma walked into my shop 6 months ago, bringing something new into my routine. She showed up on a rainy afternoon, asking about a high-end surveillance system for her new place. Said she'd just moved to town for work at Arcadia Research, a startup tucked away in the industrial park on the edge of town. She had that look people get when they've left something behind, always glancing over her shoulder, like she was expecting the past to catch up with her. I should have recognized the signs, but I let myself be drawn in. She came back to the shop a few times after that, always with an excuse, new questions about her system, looking for advice on setting up her home network. I was happy to offer my help, and I found myself looking forward to her visits more than I wanted to admit. Before long, we were having dinner together, then spending evenings in my small house on the outskirts of town. I tried not to pry into her life, but Emma kept things vague. She'd talk about her work at Arcadia, but always in general terms, as if the details were classified. I told myself it was part of her job. Research and development in a place like that came with its own set of secrets. And yet, every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of something in her eyes, a flicker of fear she couldn't quite hide. It was a look I'd seen too many times in my old line of work. The look of someone holding onto a secret they couldn't afford to lose. It wasn't until the break-in started that I began to question how much I really knew about Emma. The first one happened at Robinson & Sons, a local electronics store that had hired me to upgrade their security system a month earlier. They called me in a panic, saying someone had broken in through the back door in the middle of the night. But when I checked the footage, it was a dead end. The system had been bypassed so cleanly that it looked like the intruder knew exactly what they were doing. The police didn't find much either, and the store owner blamed it on kids looking for trouble. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I spent hours going over the footage, looking for any clue I might have missed, but there was nothing. No fingerprints, no damage, just a clean, professional job. A few days later, the same thing happened at another client's property, an auto shop on the outskirts of town. The break-in followed the same pattern, leaving behind no trace except for a single motion sensor that had been disabled with surgical precision. I tried to put it out of my mind, telling myself that it wasn't my problem anymore. But the coincidence was hard to ignore. 2 places I'd recently upgraded, hit in the same way. I felt the old itch returning, the one that told me to dig deeper, to find the pattern no one else could see. Then came the night when I overheard Emma's phone call. It was late, past midnight, when I heard her voice drifting through the half-open door of my bedroom. Emma had stayed over, but she'd slipped out of bed and into the living room without waking me. I found her pacing near the window, phone pressed to her ear, her voice low and urgent. "No, he doesn't know," she was saying her back to me. "I'm being careful. Just keep your end of the deal, okay?" I stayed still, listening as her words became even more hushed, difficult to make out. But I caught fragments, something about the job and keeping him in the dark. Then she glanced back toward the bedroom, and I ducked out of sight, my heart pounding in my chest. When she finally came back to bed, I pretended to be asleep, my mind racing with possibilities. I wanted to believe it was nothing, maybe just work stress or some old acquaintance leaning on her for a favor. But the look in her eyes when she thought no one was watching made me think there was more to it than that. The next morning, I asked her about the call, trying to keep my tone light. "Heard you talking late last night. Everything okay?" She hesitated just for a second before flashing me that easy smile. "Yeah, just some work stuff. Sorry if I woke you." I nodded, but the unease stayed with me. A small voice in the back of my mind whispered that she was lying, that she was hiding something from me. But I pushed it away, telling myself that I was being paranoid. After all, I'd made a promise to myself when I left the city. I wouldn't let the ghosts of my past take over my life again. Still, I couldn't help but notice the way she kept glancing at her phone over the next few days. like she was waiting for a message she couldn't ignore. It wasn't until I found the hidden file on her laptop that I realized how deep her secrets went. She'd left her laptop open one evening while she was in the shower, and I couldn't resist the urge to take a look. I didn't plan on snooping, just a quick glance at her browser history, a way to reassure myself that I was overreacting. But that's when I saw the folder on her desktop, Project Echo. I clicked on it, and a password prompt appeared, but not before I glimpsed a list of files, strings of numbers and names that looked suspiciously like addresses. Some of them I recognized, clients I'd done work for recently. My stomach twisted as I imagined the break-ins, the way those places had been targeted so precisely. I closed the laptop before Emma came back into the room, my mind spinning with questions. Why did she have information on my clients? And what was Project Echo, if it wasn't the classified research she'd mentioned before? That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying our conversations in my mind. I thought of the break-ins, of the look in her eyes when she thought no one was watching. And I realized that I couldn't let this go. I reached for my phone and pulled up a contact I hadn't called in years, Mia. She picked up on the second ring, her voice groggy but alert. "David? What the hell's going on?" "I need your help," I said, keeping my voice low so Emma wouldn't hear. "It's about someone I'm seeing, and I think she's hiding something big." Mia sighed, but I could hear the interest in her tone. "This better be good, David. I'm listening." The next morning, I woke to the sound of Emma's car pulling out of the driveway, leaving me alone in the quiet house. She had a habit of slipping out early, especially on the days when she said her work at Arcadia demanded more of her time. I watched from the window as she disappeared down the street, the knot in my stomach tightening. Once I was sure she wouldn't be back anytime soon, I pulled out my phone and called Mia. It had been years since we'd worked together, but her instincts were as sharp as ever, and I knew I could trust her with something like this. "David," she said, her tone cautious. "What are you mixed up in this time?" "It's complicated," I replied, pacing the length of the living room. "I need you to dig up information on someone, Emma Collins. She's tied to a company called Arcadia Research, but there's more to it than she's letting on." I found a hidden folder on her laptop. It's called Project Echo, and it might be connected to some break-ins at my client's properties. Mia's sigh crackled through the line. "You sure you want to go down this road, David? Digging into someone's life like this, it has a way of getting messy." I hesitated, staring at the spot where Emma's car had been. "She's hiding something, Mia. I just need to know what." There was a pause on the other end, and then Mia's tone shifted, turning all business. "All right, I'll see what I can find. But don't do anything stupid in the meantime, okay?" I forced a smile that she couldn't see. "No promises." 2 days later, Mia called back with a tension in her voice that made my blood run cold. "David, you were right. There's definitely something off about Arcadia Research. The company's funding comes from a network of shell corporations, but they all lead back to a name I haven't seen in a long time. The broker." I stopped pacing, my grip tightening on the phone. "The broker? Are you sure?" "Positive," she replied. "Whoever he is, he's careful. He's got ties to data theft, insider trading, and a few high-profile disappearances. And get this, some of the encrypted emails I pulled from Emma's account mention Echo and refer to a data collection operation that sounds a lot like corporate espionage. The emails were sent to an alias linked to the broker." I swallowed hard, my thoughts racing. If Emma was involved with the broker, then this was bigger than I'd thought. I'd run across the broker's name a few times in my old life, when rumors would surface about a shadowy figure who could make inconvenient information disappear for a price. But no one had ever been able to prove he existed, until now. "And what about Emma?" I asked. "Does she have any connection to the break-ins?" Mia hesitated, and I could almost hear her choosing her words. "I couldn't find a direct link, but the timing lines up. Every break-in happened on a night she wasn't home. And there's another thing. Arcadia recently secured a contract with one of your client's competitors. If Emma's been using your access to gather data for them, it might explain the break-ins." My mind raced, piecing together the implications. If Emma had used me to get access to security information, then everything she'd told me had been a lie. But even as I considered the possibility, I couldn't shake the memory of the fear in her voice that night on the phone, or the way she'd looked at me when she thought I wasn't paying attention, like she was carrying a weight too heavy to bear. "Thanks, Mia," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Keep digging. I'll handle things on my end. Be careful, David, she warned, her voice softening. People like the broker don't play nice. I ended the call and slipped my phone into my pocket, my thoughts spinning. Emma wasn't just hiding a secret. She was hiding a whole other life. But whether she was a victim or a player, I still didn't know. That night, I decided to follow Emma. She left the house around midnight, claiming she needed to finish some work at Arcadia. I waited a few minutes, then slipped into my car and followed her at a distance, keeping my headlights off as I trailed her through the quiet streets. She didn't go to Arcadia. Instead, she drove to a diner on the edge of town, the kind of place where people went when they didn't want to be seen. I parked down the block and watched as she stepped inside, meeting a tall man with a scar across his cheek. I recognized him immediately. He was the same man I'd seen her speaking to outside the diner a week ago. I pulled out my phone and snapped a few photos, zooming in on the tense exchange between them. Emma looked nervous, her hands gripping the edge of the table as the man spoke. I couldn't hear their conversation through the glass, but I caught a flash of anger in his expression as he leaned closer, his face inches from hers. When the man glanced my way, I ducked down, my pulse quickening. For a moment, I was sure he'd seen me, but when I looked back, he was gone, slipping out the back door of the diner and disappearing into the night. Emma stayed behind, staring down at the table with an expression that I couldn't read. When she finally returned to her car, I waited until she was out of sight before driving home, my mind churning with questions. Who was the man with the scar? And why did it seem like he had some kind of hold over her? I thought about confronting her right then and there, forcing her to explain everything, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I needed more proof, something that could confirm what I was beginning to suspect. The next few days passed in a blur of tension. Emma seemed to sense my growing distance, but she didn't push for answers, as if she had secrets of her own to keep. She tried to draw me back in with soft smiles and shared dinners, but I couldn't shake the image of her meeting that scarred man, the way she'd looked at him with a mix of fear and defiance. I found myself replaying the surveillance footage from the break-ins, looking for anything I might have missed. Each time, I kept coming back to the same detail: a motion sensor disabled at precisely the right angle, a back door opened without setting off the alarms. It was the work of someone who understood my systems inside and out. I called Mia again, my voice tight with frustration. You're sure there's no record of Emma being involved in any of this before she moved here? She's got a clean slate on the surface, but if the broker's covering for her, that wouldn't mean much, she replied. David, I know you care about her, but you need to be prepared for the possibility that she's playing you. If she's working with the broker, this could be part of a much bigger scheme. I didn't answer. Instead, I glanced at the encrypted messages on my laptop, at the photos of Emma and the scarred man in the diner. A part of me wanted to believe that she was a victim, trapped in a situation she couldn't control. But another part of me knew that people could lie, that they could twist the truth until you couldn't see the knife until it was already at your back. That night, as Emma slept beside me, I made a decision. I reached under the bed for the small recording device I'd hidden earlier and slipped it into the pocket of her jacket. If she was lying to me, I needed to know. And if she wasn't, well, maybe I'd finally get some answers. The next few days, I walked around with the weight of the recording device burning a hole in my pocket. Every time Emma went out, I'd listen back to the recordings, hoping for some clue, some explanation that would make all of this make sense. But each time, all I got was more questions. Then 3 nights after planning the device, I finally heard something that made my blood run cold. The recording began with the hum of a car engine, followed by the muffled sound of Emma's voice. She was speaking to someone, and from the way she spoke, I guessed it was the scarred man. Her tone was clipped, nervous, the way it had been during the phone call I'd overheard. It's not that simple, she was saying, her voice barely more than a whisper. David, he's starting to ask questions. I don't know how much longer I can keep him in the dark. There was a pause, then a lower, harsher voice cut through the static, too distorted for me to make out the words. But I caught enough to understand the tone, anger mixed with a threat. Emma's reply came through clearer, desperation creeping into her voice. I'm trying, okay? But he's not stupid. If he finds out what we've been doing, if he finds out about Echo, it's all over. I just need more time. My hands shook as I listened, the weight of her words settling over me like a shroud. I rewound the recording, playing it back again and again, trying to find some way to explain what I was hearing. But there was no mistaking the urgency in her tone, the way she spoke about keeping me in the dark. Whatever Project Echo was, it involved me, and it was clear that Emma had been lying about her role in all of this. That night, I waited for Emma to come home, pacing the length of the living room until I heard her car in the driveway. When she walked through the door, she froze, seeing me standing there with the recorder in my hand. "What's this?" I demanded, holding up the device. "You want to explain what you meant by keeping me in the dark?" For a moment, she just stared at me, her expression unreadable. Then she closed the door behind her, letting out a slow breath. "You were spying on me, David?" I didn't have a choice. I shot back, the anger I'd been holding back spilling over. "You've been lying to me from the start. About Arcadia, about Project Echo, about everything. What's going on, Emma? And don't tell me it's just work stuff." She hesitated, and I saw the crack in her facade. The same flicker of fear I'd glimpsed before, now laid bare. "You don't understand. I was trying to protect you." "Protect me from what?" I demanded. "From the broker? From whatever deal you've made with him." Her face paled at the mention of the broker's name, and she took a step back, her hands twisting together. "So you do know," she whispered almost to herself. "I was afraid of this." "Yeah, well, you should have been," I replied, my voice hard. "Now start talking." She crossed the room to the window, looking out into the darkness like she was searching for something. When she finally spoke, her voice was raw, as if she'd been holding back tears. "You're right. I lied to you, David. But I had to. The broker, he's got leverage over me. He found out about my past, things I thought I'd buried, and he's been using them to force me into this." I crossed my arms, leaning against the wall, trying to keep my distance. "What does he want with you? And what does any of this have to do with me?" She turned back to face me, her eyes pleading. "I used to work with a group that gathered data, stolen information, corporate secrets. I thought I left it behind when I moved here, but the broker found me. He's been using me to gather information on Arcadia's competitors, using their security systems to access their client data. That's why he needed you. He knew your reputation, knew you'd be the perfect way to get past their defenses. And you went along with it," I said, my voice bitter. "You used me." Her expression crumpled, and she took a step closer, reaching for my hand. "I didn't want it, David. I swear I didn't. But he threatened me, said if I didn't do what he wanted, he'd ruin everything I've built here. I was trying to find a way out, trying to buy time until I could figure out how to take him down." I pulled my hand back, my chest tightening. "So all of this, us, was just part of the plan?" "No," she said fiercely, her voice cracking. I fell in love with you. That wasn't part of the plan, and it's why I wanted to protect you. If the broker finds out that you're onto him, onto us, he'll make sure you pay the price." I stared at her, trying to reconcile the woman I thought I knew with the one standing in front of me now. Part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to think that she was trapped just like she claimed. But the other part, the part that remembered every lie, every secret, couldn't ignore the cold, hard facts. "How do I know you're telling the truth now?" I asked quietly. "How do I know this isn't just another story to keep me in line?" She dropped her gaze, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "You don't, but I can prove it." She crossed back to her purse and pulled out a flash drive, holding it out to me with trembling hands. "Everything you want to know is on here. Communications between me and the broker, the data he's been collecting, details about the operation. I was going to use it to negotiate with him, but now I'm giving it to you." I took the flash drive from her, my mind spinning with the implications. If she was telling the truth, then this could be the evidence I needed to take down the broker and clear my name. But if she was lying, it could be a trap, a way to shift the blame onto me and disappear once things got too hot. "I'm trusting you, David," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Please don't let him win." Against my better judgment, I agreed to hear her out. We sat down together, and she explained the full scope of the operation, how the broker's network extended beyond Arcadia, how he'd been using her to access data from companies all over the region. "I know I can't ask for your forgiveness," she said, her voice hollow. "But if you help me take him down, we might have a chance to end this. You know how he thinks? You can see the patterns. And I can get us inside. I stared at the flash drive, my mind churning with the risks. If I involved Mia, if I tried to take this to the authorities, there was a chance we could bring down the broker's network. But it would mean trusting Emma, trusting that she was finally telling the truth. And yet, as I looked in her eyes, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still hiding something, some part of herself that she kept locked away. But for now, I had no choice but to play along. "All right," I said, meeting her gaze. "But if you lie to me again, I'll turn you in myself." She nodded, and for the first time, I thought I saw a flicker of relief in her expression. But as we began to plan, I couldn't shake the cold certainty that this game was far from over. The flash drive Emma handed over-contained more than I'd expected. As I plugged it into my laptop, files flashed open. Logs of encrypted emails between Emma and the broker's network, surveillance footage of meetings she'd attended, and detailed notes on Arcadia's clients, including the security protocols I designed. It was a roadmap of her double life, laid out in black and white. I called Mia that night, filling her in on everything. "I've got evidence, but it's not enough. We need to catch the broker's people in the act, something that ties them to the break-ins and their operation." Mia let out a low whistle on the other end of the line. "David, you're playing with fire. If they catch wind of what you're doing, you won't just be looking over your shoulder. You'll be in a body bag." I glanced at Emma, who was seated at the kitchen table, her head in her hands. "I don't have a choice, Mia. Emma's given me a way in. She says she can get us close enough to expose their operation." Mia's voice softened. "And you believe her?" I hesitated, watching Emma's tense form. "I don't know, but it's the only shot we've got." "All right then," she replied. "I'll monitor things from my end. But remember, if she's lying, you get out. Don't be a hero." I ended the call and turned back to Emma, steeling myself for what came next. "Mia, I seen. We'll use the evidence you've gathered to set up a trap, but we need a location, somewhere we can stage a fake exchange with the broker's people and catch them on tape." Emma nodded, her expression grim. "There's a warehouse near the old train yard. The broker's operatives use it to store their data servers. I can get us in, but we have to make it look like I'm turning you over to them. If they suspect a trap, we won't get a second chance." I studied her face, searching for any sign of deceit. "Why should I trust you, Emma? How do I know this isn't another setup?" Her gaze didn't waver, but I saw the desperation in her eyes. "You don't. But if I wanted to run, I'd be gone by now. I'm trying to make this right, David. That has to count for something." We spent the next few days planning every detail. Emma gave me the names of the key operatives, people she'd worked with before, whose loyalty to the broker was unwavering. Mia monitored the encrypted communications, tracking their movements through anonymous message boards and hidden forums. It was a dangerous game, and every step we took felt like walking a tightrope over a pit of knives. The night of the sting, we drove out to the warehouse under the cover of darkness. Emma was tense, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Once we're inside, you need to follow my lead," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "They'll expect me to deliver you, like I'm offering you up as proof of my loyalty." "And if they don't buy it?" I asked, checking the hidden microphone Mia had given me. "What then?" "Then we run," she replied, glancing at me with a weak smile, "and hope we're faster than they are." I tried to ignore the chill that settled in my gut. We arrived at the warehouse, parking in a shadowed corner. Emma led the way through a side door, bypassing the security system with a key card she'd taken from one of the operatives. Inside, the air was stale, filled with the hum of server racks and the distant echo of dripping water. She stopped just before the main room, turning to face me. "Remember, stay close, and don't do anything unless I give the signal. We need them to think I'm still playing along." I nodded, slipping the microphone into my pocket. But as we approached the meeting spot, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a trap, that any moment Emma might turn on me, leaving me to face the broker's people alone. The warehouse floor was empty, except for a few dim lights casting shadows across the concrete. As we stepped into the center of the room, a voice echoed through the darkness. "Right on time, Emma, and you even brought a guest." The scarred man from the diner emerged from the shadows, flanked by two others, both built like brick walls, their faces hidden beneath dark hoods. He smiled at me, the same mocking smile I'd seen before. "David, isn't it? Nice to finally meet you in person." I kept my face blank, my mind racing as I scanned the room for exits. "I can't say the same," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you want?" The scarred man chuckled, circling me like a wolf assessing prey. "What we want is simple. Emma's usefulness is at an end. And as for you, well, let's just say the broker doesn't like loose ends." Emma took a step forward, her voice strained. "You promised, if I brought him, you'd let us go. That was the deal." The man's smile widened. "Deals change, sweetheart. You know that better than anyone." I tensed, glancing at Emma. For a moment, I saw a flash of something in her eyes. Regret, maybe, or fear. And I realized that she hadn't known how this would end, that she'd been hoping for an outcome that was never in the cards. "You're a fool, Emma," the scarred man said, shaking his head. "Did you really think you could outsmart the broker? That you could walk away from this?" Emma reached into her jacket, her hand closing around the hidden flash drive she'd kept as leverage. "I have evidence. All of it. Everything you've done. Every client you've blackmailed. It's going public if you don't let us go." For a moment, the scarred man's expression darkened, but then he shrugged. "You think the broker hasn't planned for that? You're nothing but a pawn, both of you." He raised a hand, and one of his men stepped forward, reaching for Emma's arm. But I moved first, grabbing the microphone from my pocket and pressing the hidden button to transmit everything to Mia. "Now!" I shouted, and chaos erupted. Mia's voice crackled in my earpiece, her words barely audible over the sound of footsteps and shouts. "Got it, David. Sending the recordings to the authorities now. Hold on." But the scarred man moved fast. He lunged for me, his fist colliding with my jaw, sending me reeling backward. Emma struggled against the second man, managing to break free just long enough to throw the flash drive across the room toward me. "David, catch!" she yelled, but before I could reach it, the scarred man tackled me to the ground, driving a knee into my ribs. "Did you really think you'd get out of this alive?" he snarled, pressing a knife to my throat. But before he could strike, Emma charged at him, slamming into his side. They crashed to the ground in a tangle of limbs, the knife skittering across the floor. I scrambled to my feet, grabbing the knife and turning it toward the remaining enforcer, who hesitated for just a moment before retreating into the shadows. Emma lay on the ground beside the scarred man, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "David," she whispered, blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. We have to get out of here before they regroup." I grabbed her hand, pulling her to her feet as sirens wailed in the distance. Together, we ran for the exit, leaving the scarred man writhing on the ground, clutching his side. But even as we burst into the night air, I couldn't escape the feeling that this was far from over, that the secrets Emma had kept were still waiting in the shadows, ready to destroy us both. The sirens grew louder as we stumbled through the back alleys, Emma leaning heavily against me. I could see the flashing lights in the distance, but we kept moving, slipping through the shadows toward my car. I glanced back once, seeing the warehouse receding into the night, and wondered if we'd just left our last chance for redemption behind us. We reached my car, and I helped Emma into the passenger seat, her breath coming in short, painful gasps. Blood trickled from a cut above her eyebrow, staining her pale skin. I felt a pang of guilt. No matter how much I doubted her, she'd saved my life back there. "Can you drive?" she asked, her voice hoarse, her hands trembling. "Yeah," I muttered, turning the key and gunning the engine. "But you better have some answers, Emma, because this isn't over, not by a long shot." She nodded, closing her eyes as the car roared down the empty road, speeding away from the chaos we'd left behind. For a moment, the only sound was the rush of wind through the open windows, the night air biting against my face. But my mind was a storm, filled with questions that wouldn't stop spinning. We made it back to my house without incident, and I guided Emma to the couch, grabbing a first aid kit from the bathroom. As I cleaned the cut on her head, she winced, but she didn't push me away. "Why did you do it?" I asked, my voice quiet. "Why did you throw yourself into that fight? You could have let him finish me off and taken the flash drive. You could have run." She looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed and glassy. Because I'm tired of running, David. I'm tired of hiding, of lying. I thought I could beat the broker at his own game, but all I've done is dig myself in deeper. I finished bandaging her wound, but I kept my distance, crossing my arms as I stood over her. You still haven't told me the whole truth, Emma. What's on that flash drive that makes it so important? She hesitated, glancing at the flash drive resting on the coffee table between us. It's more than just evidence. It's a list of every client the broker has blackmailed, every deal he's made, every dirty secret he's kept hidden. It's enough to bring down his entire operation, to expose everyone who's been working with him, including Arcadia. I frowned, my suspicion flaring again. And what do you get out of it? If you're telling the truth, then turning that over to the authorities would ruin you too. Emma's expression darkened, and she looked away, her voice barely more than a whisper. I know, but if it means keeping you safe, then maybe it's worth it. Her words cut deeper than I'd expected, stirring something I wasn't ready to face. I wanted to believe her, wanted to think that she'd finally chosen a side. But then Mia's voice crackled through my earpiece, reminding me that I wasn't alone in this. David, she said, her tone urgent. I've been going through the files you sent me, cross-referencing them with the surveillance footage from the warehouse. There's something you need to see. I moved to my laptop, pulling up the feed that Mia had sent. Grainy footage from the warehouse filled the screen, showing Emma meeting with the scarred man weeks before she claimed she was being coerced. They spoke in low tones, Emma handing him an envelope filled with cash. The date on the video confirmed my worst fear. It was from the night she told me she was working late. My heart sank as I watched the scene unfold, the scarred man's smirk matching the one I'd seen earlier that night. I turned to Emma, my jaw clenched, the betrayal sharp in my chest. You lied to me again, I said, holding up the footage on my laptop. You were working with him this whole time. How do you explain this? Emma's eyes widened as she saw the footage, her hands trembling. I can't. I was trying to buy time, to keep him off my back while I found a way out. Or you were just playing me like you've done from the start? I shot back, my voice rising. You used me to get access to my client's security, to make sure the broker's plan went smoothly. And now that it's falling apart, you're trying to play the victim. She shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. No, David, it's not like that. Save it, I snapped, cutting her off. We're done here, Emma. I'll take this evidence to the authorities myself. I turned to leave, but before I could reach the door, she lunged forward, grabbing my arm. David, please. If you do this, the broker will come after you. He has people everywhere. He'll know you're the one who exposed him. You'll be putting your life on the line. I wrenched my arm free, my heart pounding in my ears. Better mine than yours. Before I could take another step, a knock echoed through the front door, sharp and insistent. Emma's face went pale, and she grabbed my hand, pulling me back into the shadows of the hallway. It's them, she whispered, her breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. The broker's people, they must have followed us. They'll kill us both if they think we have the flash drive. I glanced toward the door, hearing the low murmur of voices outside. My mind raced, calculating our options. If I opened the door, they'd see the evidence, see Emma, and I had no doubt they'd eliminate us both. But if we ran, we'd be on the run for the rest of our lives, hunted by a network that didn't tolerate loose ends. I turned to Emma, her face inches from mine, her eyes filled with terror. You're sure this flash drive has everything we need to take them down? She nodded, clutching my arm. Yes, but we need time. Time to get it to someone who can protect us. I took a deep breath, my decision made. All right, we're going to walk out of here together. But if you try to betray me again, I won't hesitate. She swallowed hard, but she nodded, her grip tightening on my hand. I won't. I pocketed the flash drive and pulled my gun from the drawer, slipping it into the back of my waistband. Then I turned toward the door, steeling myself for whatever came next. But as I reached for the handle, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a trap, one that neither of us might survive. I opened the door slowly, revealing two figures standing in the dim light of the porch. One of them the scarred man, the other a woman with a cold, unblinking stare. The scarred man's smirk widened as he saw me, but his eyes narrowed when he caught sight of Emma standing behind me. Well, he drawled. Look who decided to play hero. Where's the flash drive, David? Hand it over, and maybe I'll let you walk away. I forced a smile, my hand resting on the gun tucked behind my back. You think I'm that stupid? The woman beside him pulled out a gun of her own, leveling it at Emma's chest. We don't have time for this. Give us what we came for, or she dies. I felt Emma's grip tighten on my arm, and I knew that this was the moment of truth. With a final look at her, I made my move, drawing my gun and firing a single shot into the air. The sound echoed through the night, and the scarred man flinched, but before he could react, Emma drove her elbow into the woman's side, sending her stumbling. I charged forward, knocking the gun from the scarred man's hand, the two of us grappling in the doorway. But even as we struggled, I saw the fear in Emma's eyes, the realization that this might be the last chance we had to escape the broker's reach. And I knew that whatever came next, we were both out of time. The shot I'd fired into the air had bought us a moment, but not much more. The scarred man recovered quickly, shoving me against the doorframe, his weight crushing against my chest. He grinned as he drove his forearm into my throat, pinning me in place. Nice try, hero, he growled, his breath hot against my face. But you're out of your depth. I struggled against him, glancing toward Emma. She had managed to grab the gun that the woman had dropped and was now holding it with trembling hands, aimed directly at the scarred man's back. Her eyes met mine, and for a split second, I saw hesitation flicker across her face, like she was still deciding which side she was really on. Emma, do it! I choked out, feeling the pressure against my windpipe tighten. The scarred man twisted his head to look at her, his smirk widening. Come on, Emma. You don't have it in you. Just hand over the drive, and I'll make this quick. Her hands shook, the barrel of the gun wavering as she stared at him, her breaths coming in sharp, shallow bursts. I could see the fear in her eyes, the weight of every lie and betrayal pressing down on her. And I knew that whatever decision she made in this moment would change everything. Then, with a look of grim determination, she steadied the gun and pulled the trigger. The shot rang out, echoing through the night. The scarred man's body jerked, his grip on me loosening as blood bloomed across his chest. He stumbled backward, clutching the wound, a look of shock frozen on his face. For a moment, he seemed like he might recover, but then he collapsed to the ground, his breathing turning into a wet, rasping sound. Emma stood there, the gun still smoking in her hands, her expression blank. I pushed myself up from the ground, catching my breath, but I kept my eyes on her, watching for any sign that she might turn the gun on me next. She dropped the weapon, her shoulders sagging as if a weight had been lifted. David, I didn't want it to end like this, but I couldn't let them take you. I glanced down at the scarred man, who lay gasping his last breaths, then back at Emma. Is it over? I asked, my voice raw. Or is this just another chapter in your story? She swallowed, wiping a tear from her cheek. It's over. The broker, he won't stop looking for us, but with the evidence we have, we can bring him down. Together. We didn't have much time. With the scarred man dying at our feet, I grabbed the flash drive from my pocket, slipping it into the laptop on my desk. Mia's voice crackled in my ear again, tense and urgent. David, what's going on? I heard gunfire. It's done, I said, glancing at Emma. We have the drive, but we need to upload the data now, before the broker's people find us. I heard her typing frantically on the other end, and then she swore under her breath. I'm patching into a secure server. Give me a minute, and I'll get this sent to the right people. But David, you need to get out of there. I watched the progress bar on the screen, inching forward as the files transferred. Emma paced behind me, wringing her hands, her eyes darting to the windows as if expecting more shadows to appear at any moment. As the upload neared completion, I felt a pang of uncertainty, a last nagging doubt. I turned to face her. Emma, if this is another trick, if you're playing me, there won't be another chance to make it right. She met my gaze, her expression softening, and for a moment, I thought I saw something genuine in her eyes, regret, or maybe just weariness. David, I know I've lied to you more times than I can count, But this time, I'm telling the truth. I want out, and I want you to get out too. The progress bar hit 100%, and a message flashed on the screen. Transfer complete. I let out a shaky breath, knowing that the evidence was no longer in our hands, but in Mia's. Now it was up to her to deliver it, to bring down the broker's network once and for all. But just as the relief began to sink in, I heard the click of a gun's safety being released. I turned, and my heart stopped. Emma was standing a few feet away, holding the scarred man's gun, aimed squarely at my chest. "Emma," I started, but she cut me off, her voice cold and steady. "I'm sorry, David," she said, her hand shaking only slightly. "But you left me no choice. I never planned for it to end this way. But you're too much of a threat now. You have the evidence, and you know too much." My chest tightened, my mind racing to find a way out. "You said you wanted to be free, that you wanted to take the broker down. Was that all a lie?" She bit her lip, a flicker of pain crossing her face. "No, part of me did want that. But the other part, the part that spent years surviving by any means necessary, I can't let you hand me over to the authorities, David. Not after everything I've done." I took a step closer, trying to keep my hands steady. "You don't have to do this, Emma. We could both walk away. I'll tell them you were forced into it, that you were a victim too." She shook her head, and for the first time, I saw tears spill down her cheeks. "No, you won't. Because you're too good, David. You'll tell them the truth, and I'll go to prison for the rest of my life. I can't let that happen." She squeezed the trigger, and time seemed to slow. But before the shot rang out, the door behind me burst open, and Mia's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Drop it, Emma. It's over." Emma hesitated, turning to look at Mia, standing in the doorway, gun raised. In that moment of distraction, I lunged forward, grabbing for the gun in Emma's hand. The shot went wide, splintering the frame of the window, but I managed to wrench the weapon from her grip, sending it clattering to the floor. Emma fell to her knees, her face crumpling as the realization of her defeat sank in. She looked up at me, her expression a mix of anger and heartbreak. "I never meant for you to get hurt, David. I didn't see any other way." I looked down at her, my chest tight with a hollow ache. "I wish I could believe that, Emma." The police arrived minutes later, summoned by Mia's call. They took Emma into custody, her wrists bound in handcuffs as they led her out of the house. She didn't struggle, didn't speak, just kept her head down, as if accepting her fate. Mia walked over to me, slipping her gun back into its holster. "You did good, David. It's over now." I shook my head, watching as Emma disappeared into the back of a squad car. "No, it's not. Not for her. Not for me." Mia sighed, resting a hand on my shoulder. "It's going to take time, but you did the right thing. You stopped her, and now the broker's network is exposed. That has to count for something." I nodded, but I couldn't shake the emptiness that lingered in my chest. Even as I watched the police cars drive away, I knew that the ghosts of this night would follow me for a long time. Shadows that wouldn't fade, no matter how much light I tried to bring into my life. As I stood in the wreckage of my home, staring out at the first light of dawn, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I opened it, my breath catching as I read the single word, "Goodbye." It could have been from Emma, sent before she'd been taken away. Or it could have been from someone else, another shadow in the endless maze of secrets that had consumed us both. Either way, I knew that the game was over, but the questions would never truly be answered. And as I watched the sun rise, I couldn't help but wonder if some truths were better left buried, if some betrayals were meant to haunt us forever.